Wyatt Tessari-L'Allie is the founder and executive director of AI Governance and Safety Canada, Canada's leading civil society voice on the governance of advanced AI. A former engineer, filmmaker, and climate activist, he is the author of the book A Path Forward This Century and has testified on Canada's Bill C-27 AI and Data Act and regularly appears in the media. Launched in 2022, EAGS Canada is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit, and a community of people across the country working to ensure AI is safe and beneficial for all. Its mission is to make Canada a leader in AI governance and safety, and their work focused on policy development, movement building, and advocacy. For a fireside chat about AI governance in Canada, please join me in welcoming Wyatt Tessari-L'Allie. Here's all right. Whoa, a little loud. Thanks for being here, Wyatt.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the intro stuff. Why did you get involved in AI governance, and why does this cause matter to you?
So I guess there's two things. One, I've always been interested in public affairs. I've always gravitated towards the big issues. In 2010, when I got involved in politics the first time, I looked around and asked the question, what needed doing? And climate change was a big answer that nobody was working on. So that's how I got started with that. And then when 2015 came around and AI safety became, well, when I read Superintelligence by Bostrom and other sources, it became pretty clear to me that this was a big thing to be working on. The other aspect is, of course, the nature and implications of AGI itself. I mean, when people talk about, 2 to 10 year timeline on AGI, or talk about, extinction risk of like 20%, and to put it bluntly, that means we could all be dead in 2 years. Or on the career side, these could be the last few years of our career. So those two things combined, I started asking, okay, so what if I have, we were always going to retire at some point, we were always going to die at some point, but say this is all condensed and really focused in a few years. What do I want to spend my time on? And given the two things together, to me, it creates this really deep determination to see success through on the AGI front. Because that's the thing is, it is still possible to make AGI safe. It is still possible to make sure that the transition to a post-world work world is beneficial for everybody. And so, yeah, so I can't imagine doing anything other than working on AGI governance right now. So
this is really the problem of our time.
Yes. Yeah.
And despite this, the most advanced AI models are mainly being developed in US and China. So what can Canada do on this stage?
Great question. Is one I get a lot because, yeah, we think of Canada as a smaller country, as a supporting character in the story of AI. But for those who watch movies or theater, sometimes the supporting actor can steal the show. And I think this is definitely the case for Canada on AI. Two areas where we really can have impact. Foreign policy, for those who have followed Canadian foreign policy over the years, recently we haven't done much, but in the past, for example, with the Suez Canal in 1956, when our Prime Minister Pearson came up with a novel solution just at the right time to get the French and British and Israelis to pull out of the Suez, which they'd invaded. And so it's kind of thing where like a secondary player doing the right thing at the right time can catalyze the main players to take the right actions. So there's a lot of stuff we can do that on the AI front, hosting global talks, pushing the conversation forward on policy, just making sure that, whenever there is a gathering of leaders or that AI is at the top of the agenda that is being dealt with first. On the domestic side, we don't have a very large market, so we don't have the weight of the EU or the US. But we do have the ability, because we're smaller and nimbler, we can pilot stuff. We can, people talk a lot about like compute governments, for example. Let's try that out here, see if it works or not. So if we find out what the bottlenecks are, where things fail or where things succeed, so that if and when the other countries decide to do it, they can say, oh, it's worked here or it hasn't worked here, and for these reasons. So there's just so much we could be doing if we had an active, informed government on this stuff, and not just government, but broader society as well. Yeah.
Wow. So what has Canada done so far to advance AI governance? Let's start. What's happened in the past year?
Yes. Well, I guess the starting point was 2017 was the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. Canada was the first to put in place to recognize AI as a strategic issue, and to invest in foundational research basically to advanced AI. So the initial 3 years is all about boosting AI investments and capabilities, and then with that they launched the GPA Global Partnership on AI, which is kind of a also more of a booster, but it's a general collaboration among countries on AI for good. And then so in the last year, things really started to change. Obviously, ChatGPT comes out, people start realizing this is a big issue is happening now. So they've done the basics. They proposed a law, the AI Data Act, similar in intent to the EUA Act. They've done voluntary codes for the industry. They've done government guides for how to use it within public service. And they've also recently last year signed the legislative declaration recognizing AI safety. Although I've been told they had their arm twist on that one, but for a good reason. And then they also agreed to set up an AI Safety Institute, to which they are in the process of designing at this point. So,
yeah, double click on the AI and Data Act. It's currently being studied by the House of Commons Industry Committee. You kind of explain what the act will do?
Yeah, so it's focused on industry, providing a regulatory regime for basically explaining to industry what is an acceptable AI system, what is high risk, what is not, and putting in place auditing and reporting requirements for models. It is just focused on private sector, and it's also pretty mild, although it does have a couple of clauses which industry doesn't like, which there's a jail term and a significant fines for those who breach the terms. It's been updated halfway through. So it was introduced in 2022, and then ChatGPT came out, and so they updated with some amendments to include some general purpose language on it. It's better than nothing, but frustratingly less than what it could be, Bill.
I see. And you were invited to testify on the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act of Parliament, right? Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, no, it was good. So they as part of the studying the bill, in committee they go through every section and discuss the bill. So at the end they bring in witnesses. I was one of them, and yeah, I mean, for me, it was just you obviously have relatively little time as a witness to get your point across. So I was really trying to get them to understand where AI is headed, because there's a tendency in all sectors, not just government, to look at, this is what AI is, and look at your generative AI. This is the thing, and then no, the thing is what's coming in for the next, So like the old Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is headed, skate to where the puck is headed type messaging. And just reiterating the concerns around safety and impacts on jobs, and just help them understand just how big a deal this is. Yeah.
So, and tell us about the reception from the room. Did you get the impression that people understood the magnitude of the problem that we're dealing with?
Yes and no. So there's initial their facial expressions as they're absorbing we could all be dead in 2 years type messaging was somber and seriously worried. The questions they asked obviously hadn't registered enough to be able to ask anything intelligent about it yet. So I mean, Yashar Benju's been out there, Jerry Hinton's been out there. So it's pretty, for those who have, they've heard these from other sources as well, but it's still early on. It's still not something that most politicians don't have a technical background, so they don't instinctively understand what AI could do. So yeah, it was. It wasn't dismissive, which is very good. Unfortunately for me, I had Gillian Hadfield on the same round of witnesses with me, so she also reinforced that catastrophic risk is a thing. So yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like there just needs to be more expert opinion, and they need to be better able to transmit those messages to people in power. And
yes, exactly. And also translate what this AI system can do means for the political realities. Because I mean, AI is, especially AGI, is the biggest political issue of probably human history happening over the next 2 to 10 years. So it's an earthquake waiting to happen politically. It hasn't because it's still this kind of theoretical thing in the distance, or this chatbot they're not sure how to use yet. It hasn't really registered that that you're looking at probably very large layoffs and possibly total restructuring of education systems, of healthcare systems, of the whole 9 yards. It's a big deal. Yeah.
Wow. And so EA just wrote a white paper recently, where you've identified 5 gaps and opportunities for Canada in AI governance. Can you tell us more about them?
Yeah, so so some of them are fairly self-explanatory, but yeah, basically there are lots of areas where Canada can be doing more. Number one is make sure that government has the capacity to act and understand what's going on. So Initially, we'd called for a team within PCO, which is the top body in government, but now we're actually calling for a full-on Ministry of AI. And the advantage of that is that if you have a Minister of AI, most of the main decisions in government happen at cabinet level among ministers. And so if you have a voice at cabinet whose job is to make sure that the AI perspective is being brought into its discussions on all topics, that can really make sure the issue doesn't get lost. And also having a Ministry of AI means you have a dedicated ministry to do the regulation of industry or to manage the licensing and auditing and that kind of stuff, which right now everything is pushed into ISED, the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Ministry, basically Industry Canada, who's has a conflicting mandate of boosting the economy and also regulating AI. So,
yeah, and that doesn't always work well.
Yes, yeah, I mean, the good intentions, but yeah, and I guess the other four are championing and funding global initiatives. Certainly, I mentioned in my previous question, there's so much Canada could be doing on the foreign stage. That's hosting talks. For example, we'll be hosting the G7 in 2025. We should make sure AI is top of the agenda and ideally talking openly about AGI. So that kind of stuff. Third is I think if I can remember off the top of my head, I should do these. And Data Act. So obviously we need the local legislation. And I won't reiterate on that one. And actually one thing I will say is if Canada doesn't have AI legislation, but the EU and US do, what that means is that we could become like a safe haven for those who don't want to comply with their regulations. So at least not be a straggler in that regard is important. And then, investing in number 4 is investing in governance and safety research. So there is the new AI Safety Institute, which is being set up. And it will be in coordination with the other safety institutes like the one in UK and US. We're advocating to make sure that it gets full funding and that the Compute Access Fund, the $2 billion the government announced for compute in the spring, gets allocated significantly towards safety research versus purely capabilities. And finally, the one closest to my heart is a national conversation on AI. So this is really, given that everybody's life will be dramatically impacted by this technology, really, this is an issue that everyone should have a say in or at least be informed about. So a two-way conversation to really engage the public on where AI is headed, what that could mean in terms of the future, and then consult sincerely and with an open mind as to, okay, so how do we, what does a post-work world future look like? What are the mechanisms? What are the safety mechanisms that we are willing to accept in order to ensure AI safe? Just there's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about in AI, and the more, and also it'll mean that if you have that consultation, when government goes to make a decision, they'll know that they have the public behind them because the public has told them that. Whereas right now, they're making decisions on the assumption that either the public won't notice or that they're behind them, but they don't know for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think public wants to be engaged in these types of conversations that they know will impact their future, right? Yep. Sometimes when I talk to friends or my parents about this, it's like I can tell that they're just not really following the the notions of what we're talking about. And so I was hoping actually you can talk about some of the lessons you learned from green activism, because you previously campaigned for the Green Party of Canada, and like AI, climate change is a long-term problem, but it seems like public awareness has come a long way in the past decade. So did you learn anything during that time in your life, and how did it apply to AI?
Great question. Yeah. So I guess at a practical level, so yeah, just seeing how politics works, how what gets things moving, was very useful. Just generally upskilling, understanding how the democratic process is. On the issue itself, some interesting parallels. Obviously, big global issue. No single person can solve it on their own. It feels like it's somebody else's problem, even though it's going to impact us. And it's taken, 50 years to get to the point where we're kind of seriously talking about climate change these days. And even then, a lot of the policies we need to put in place are not quite there yet. So it is a kind of a warning signal of how hard AGI could be. There are some important differences, though. One is that whereas, extreme weather events or other climate change is a very slow moving beast. Even though it's gradually ramping up over years, it's still going to take decades to really see the full sea level rise and that kind of stuff. So it's hard to feel the urgency of it, even though there is definitely urgency on the policy side. Whereas AI, I mean, there again, we don't know the timelines on AGI. We could get lucky and maybe we have 30, 40 years and, I look like an idiot and that'd be wonderful. But we also could be in very, very, I mean, if the exponential takes off and we start seeing major capability jumps, as you would expect on that kind of curve, then yeah, I mean, 2 years is not impossible, in which case it's a much more urgent problem. And so politically is more salient. It's also more, I mean, we're talking about earlier, everyone's personal life will be affected. I think it's fair to say that AGI will disrupt people's lives far more than climate change will, even though climate change will, for many people, be very disruptive. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess in the last 5 years, especially, it's been amazing to see how the youth have taken the message of climate change and like made it a global message. And so what happens when the public at a grassroots level becomes confrontational with those that are, say, enabling a long-term problem or are the decision makers? Like, what does activism look like at the grassroots level in terms of getting people to act on AI and kind of determining their future?
Yeah, I mean, the most simple is just make it an election issue, make it a political issue, so that politicians understand if they want to get elected, they have to care about this and have a plan for it. It is. I mean, for what we're seeing right now, like the first initial signs of that is on the union side, like the SAG, after the filmmaker and actors guilds in the United States striking on the issue of obviously concerns around deepfakes and that kind of stuff. And we saw in Canada there's the longshoremen's strike in the Port of Vancouver last summer, and one of the clauses was not get replaced by AI. So we're starting to see a little bit of that, but that's the jobs front is very much a rear guard action, and I think the more effective will be to push politicians on making sure there's policies on this. And the thing is, I mean, an interesting thing is on public opinion polling, there's both very little understanding of AI, but also concern around, like they understand, they don't understand exactly how it works, but they do understand it could be an issue, and there is a genuine desire to see it to be well governed, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think people need to understand AI before they outright campaign against it or engage in activism?
I mean, understanding, yeah. I guess I don't understand the inner models. Well, I guess no expert fully understands. I guess maybe Roger Gross may understand the inside of a model, but it's a very complicated topic. Yeah, I think at the high level, just understanding that yes, we are headed into a world with smarter than human systems. We will be able to automate all work if we want to, and I think that's, if you have that basic level of understanding, then it's a question of, okay, so how do we make sure that is a positive world for everyone? How do we make sure no one left behind?
Yeah. So you said before that the first Pan-Canadian strategy was instituted in 2017. I mean, that was 7 years ago. This is new. This is like, I can clearly remember 2017. And so now we're in 2024. Who are the players in Canada that matter in AI governance?
Yeah, so there's the biggest one obviously is government, because they're the ones who set the laws, and within government, so I said the Ministry of Industry, and PCO, the top central agency in governments, and to a lesser extent TBS, which is their kind of central the Treasury Board Secretariat, which is responsible for HR and inner workings of government, for setting the adoption of AI in government, and global affairs. Has mostly been AWOL, but is slowly getting into it as well because they're realizing how big a foreign policy issue this is. So yeah, the government big piece. The other piece, obviously, industry. There are 1,500 startups in Canada, many doing really amazing work on point solutions, and we have on the AGI front, there's Sanctuary AI in Vancouver doing embodied AGI robotics, and we have various researchers, like some of them with the CFAR network, we're openly working on it as well. And then so there's government, industry, academia is obviously a very big, and was really the source of the AI leadership for many years. That's the CFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research Network. They coordinate. They're the ones who run the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, and with them in the network is Mila, Vector, Amy, and they. So that's where like the bulk of the scientific expertise is probably with that network. The other side of academia, more on the social sciences side, had led the way on a lot of the AI ethics, privacy, and kind of like the the first wave of concerns around AI, around these single purpose models thing. But unfortunately, that there's a ongoing battle within academia and the AI expert community around whether or not to take AGI and XRS seriously. Obviously, you have leading scientists like Joshua Bengio and Jeffrey Hinton being very clear about it, but it's become a political issue even within organizations like Mila, which is unfortunate to see. But yeah.
Double click on that. Like, what are the two parties and the arguments for and against?
Roughly, it's not even so much about AGI. It's mostly about is it a catastrophic risk? Can you lose control of AI in a way that is bad enough that it could kill everyone, or can it be weaponized to be as dangerous as a nuclear weapon? On that front, yeah, that's there are those who are saying no tend to attack the messenger and say, look at the people who are pushing this, or like Silicon Valley and people who want to create buzz around their products and gain the headlines. They're also fairly point out that this is all in theory theoretical because it doesn't exist yet. I mean, neither does 3-degree climate change, but so that's the kind of messaging I've been hearing from it. A lot of it's just a refusal to even talk about it. I think also there is probably just fear and disorientation, and just like this is such a big issue that like if you accept it as real and internalize it and start making decisions in your life about it, like it's just such a big switch. So there's a resistance to that. I hope that I've personally been convinced by the safety arguments, and I hope that it'll eventually become mainstream as climate changes, but we're not there yet. So,
yeah. So you mentioned academia being far and away the leaders of AI in Canada and advancing AI governance and safety arguments.
Initially, yes. Right now, the industry is definitely playing a bigger role. But yeah, in terms of like the voices that government turns to get advice on policy and advice on the technology, there's definitely the CFR network and academia in general. And the last, unfortunately, the think tank community in Canada, so your CD House or Macdonald-Laurier Institutes or your Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, they haven't caught on to AI just yet. So there's been some work on like the ethics portion of it and bias and some misinformation, but they like even in those circles, like AGI, they've either never heard of it or they haven't had time to wrap their heads around it. And so a lot of the policy source experts that government would turn to, often they're not aware of it, not talking about it yet. And so that leaves, and then on the purely civil society side, so more like the community organizers and the think groups like AGS, we're pretty much occupying a wide open space because there are a few on the on the early first waves of AI, like the ethics and bias concerns. There are some there, but for the most part, anything that is forward-looking, where we're in a unique, both frustrating and the good position to be in. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So let's walk through like a pragmatic example. Like, I feel like if you had 5 minutes with the prime minister, you could convince them like within 5 minutes that like AGI is a serious risk, and then Canada needs to be taking this more seriously. But of course, we don't necessarily have an audience with the prime minister, but as individuals, as agents, we can still have change in our own communities. Like, what are the channels to government that will sway this opinion and get more leaders to care about it? Because what I heard from that is the awareness isn't there yet.
Yeah.
So how do we get through to the people in power?
So a lot of it is, just generally, the more people we talk to and more awareness raise, the better. Ideally, like all these think tanks, the other advocacy orgs like the Council of Canadians or the National Citizen Coalition, there's a lot of, if all of those organizations were talking and pushing their leaders and politicians to do the right thing, I think hearing a clear voice from a good variety of groups would be very impactful. There again, that's a job of a politician, and first is to get elected. And I think there's a sense of like if they understand that this is an
awesome. Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started now if you want to take your seats. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope you're having a great EAGxToronto so far. My name is Chris Tardy. I'm a volunteer for EAGxToronto, and I'll be moderating today's talk. Housekeeping before we start. For our guests today, we'll have a Q&A period at the end. and please ask your questions in Swapcard. You can ask them by tapping on the event in your app and submitting a question. And if someone else has already asked your question, upvote it to have it answered quicker. Wyatt Tessari-L'Allie is the founder and executive director of AI Governance and Safety Canada, Canada's leading civil society voice on the governance of advanced AI. A former engineer, filmmaker, and climate activist, he is the author of the book A Path Forward This Century and has testified on Canada's Bill C-27, AI and Data Act, and regularly appears in the media. Launched in 2022, EAGS Canada is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit, and a community of people across the country working to ensure AI is safe and beneficial for all. Its mission is to make Canada a leader in AI governance and safety, and their work focused on policy development, movement building, and advocacy. For a fireside chat about AI governance in Canada, please join me in welcoming Wyatt Tessari-L'Allie. Here's all right. Whoa, a little loud. Thanks for being here, Wyatt.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the intro stuff. Why did you get involved in AI governance, and why does this cause matter to you?
So I guess there's two things. One, I've always been interested in public affairs. I've always gravitated towards the big issues. In 2010, when I got involved in politics the first time, I looked around and asked the question, what needed doing? And climate change was a big answer that nobody was working on. So that's how I got started with that. And then when 2015 came around and AI safety became, well, when I read Superintelligence by Bostrom and other sources, it became pretty clear to me that this was a big thing to be working on. The other aspect is, of course, the nature and implications of AGI itself. I mean, when people talk about, 2 to 10 year timeline on AGI, or talk about, extinction risk of like 20%, and to put it bluntly, that means we could all be dead in 2 years. Or on the career side, these could be the last few years of our career. So those two things combined, and you start asking, okay, so what if I have, we were always going to retire at some point, we were always going to die at some point, but say this is all condensed and really focused in a few years. What do I want to spend my time on? And given the two things together, to me, it creates this really deep determination to see success through on the AGI front. Because that's the thing is, it is still possible to make AGI safe. It is still possible to make sure that the transition to a post-world work world is beneficial for everybody. And so, so I can't imagine doing anything other than working on AGI governance right now. So
this is really the problem of our time.
Yes. Yeah.
And despite this, the most advanced AI models are mainly being developed in US and China. So what can Canada do on this stage?
Great question. Is one I get a lot because we think of Canada as a smaller country, as a supporting character in the story of AI. But for those who watch movies or theater, sometimes the supporting actor can steal the show. And I think this is definitely the case for Canada on AI. Two areas where we really can have impact. So foreign policy, for those who have followed Canadian foreign policy over the years, recently we haven't done much, but in the past, for example, with the Suez Canal in 1956, when our Prime Minister Pearson came up with a novel solution just at the right time to get the French and British and Israelis to pull out of the Suez, which they'd invaded. And so this kind of thing where like a secondary player doing the right thing at the right time can catalyze the main players to take the right actions. So there's a lot of stuff we can do that on the AI front, hosting global talks, pushing the conversation forward on policy, just making sure that whenever there is a gathering of leaders or that AI is at the top of the agenda that is being dealt with first. On the debate
to each outcome.
So my perspective, and it's similar to like the PDUM discussions. It's above 1% chance of success and less than 99% chance of success, which is to say that it's we're not doomed and there's nothing guaranteed. It's enough that we have to work our asses off and do what we can and to increase the odds. Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of your recommendations are about taking AI more seriously, but in a future world where it's obvious AI is serious, what kind of policies would you recommend? Universal basic income, compute governance, anything else?
What I would recommend is investment in figuring out what those policies should be, because right now there really is a lack of fully developed research on this. I mean, there has been some, but yeah, UBI will probably be part of the solution. Certainly, if we get to the point where we can automate everything and you can drop the cost of goods and services down to almost zero, then the cost of providing a UBI should be affordable. So I think that's likely. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these compute governments, I'd be happy to see a trial to see how it works and to help start refining it. But yeah, right now the challenge for government is that even if they wanted to take AGI super seriously, what are the 10 things they need to be doing? It's not super clear, and so yeah, the first step is really to figure that out. Yeah,
I see. Is there a focus within regulation on superintelligence risk, or is all of the focus on systemic risks?
Most of the regulation, for example, on the ADA, it's more they're basing on usage caps, like on case use case. So it's like if you're using it in healthcare, or if you're using it in other areas. There isn't any overt language on superintelligence in the ADA Act. I don't think there was in the EWA Act. They're probably on systemic, but I think, I mean, as long as we're considering systemic risk and that includes superintelligence, then I think that's good. And also to give you a sense, since like the Bank of Canada and many other banks are national banks are worried about, even if we don't, this is before you get to AGI, just if a major breakthrough in AI creates a sudden change in employment, that can really mess up the financial system, right? And so they're looking at, there's a lot of just, steps along the way, yeah.
So, Just as a follow-up on that question, do you think that when convincing people of the risk of AGI, is it more useful to talk about like extinction level events or job losses, which will create instability? Is that enough?
So, very good question. And so far, what's worked best for us is just start with the basics. Human intelligence is staying the same. AI is getting better by the day. We are headed into a world with smarter than human AI. And I think if you can hammer away that to the point where they realize, okay, no, we're entering that world. Once that part is accepted, then you realize, oh, wait a minute, if the system can outcompete me in the real world, if there's an accident, if it's misused, that could be dangerous. See, that's kind of like, so you start with that, and then and same thing with jobs. If the system can do everything better than me, what am I doing exactly work-wise? And that's kind of so it really start with that opening line and then let people fill in the blanks from there. Yeah.
I see. Thank you. We have a question about the volunteers for AIGS. What sort of work do the volunteers do?
A good variety. We're actually we're seeing an almost exponential rise in volunteers, which is wonderful. As a result, we're looking at switching strategies to be more engaged in the federal election. So pushing raising awareness about AGI in the 2025 federal election, because that's something that we can really scale up with like hundreds of volunteers if we get to that point. We also do we need help with variety of stuff like staying on top of all the research and data that's coming out on AI is huge. If you go to EAGxToronto and get involved, you'll see there's a list of opportunities on that page, and you'll see the dashboard of all the many ways you can help. So,
thank you. Yeah. Is AIGS helping the Canadian government create and design the Canadian AI Safety Institute?
Helping in a small H, yeah. So we did. I did have a consultation with one of the DG, the Director Generals in ISED, who was responsible for working on that project. So they did listen to us, and it sounded like what did seem like good news was when I pushed hard on making sure that the part of the agenda of the Canada's AI Safety Institute would be to clarify the nature of the risks from AI. Because I think having like a scientific body say, yes, this is a risk would be so much help. And I know Yoshua Bengio has his international scientific report on the safety of advanced AI, and that came out, the first interim came out a few months ago or a year ago, and time flies. And then basically the conclusion to that was there was disagreement within the community, which, to be fair, so I hope that disagreement can be narrowed down to like climate change to a pretty clear consensus on, okay, we need to at least take this seriously. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Do you have a rough sense on how many people are working on safety versus ethics?
It'll Right now, it's probably significantly heavier on the ethics, just because it's been around longer, right? So since mid 2010s, people realized, wait a minute, these systems are like denying people jobs and bail and other things, and so there has been like a whole cottage industry, especially in academia, like a lot of like these, ethics centers have really taken to heart this issue, and good for them. The safety piece is more recent. Other than like clusters of researchers at U of T, Mila, and a few independent ones, I haven't seen too many groups of researchers working directly on safety, but that number is growing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I guess as a part B of that question, like, could you define safety versus ethics in AI governance, like more specifically?
Yes, I mean, so the ethics, the traditional, we say ethics, that typically mean addressing the very real issues with biased algorithms causing basically unfair advantages to certain groups and to others. So yeah, like people getting denied jobs or bail or mortgages because the algorithm was designed to keep their demographic profile in mind. So that's kind of, when you think of AI ethics, it's mostly that, as well as privacy and to a certain extent misinformation. Safety is more on the technical, will the system kill you type thing, which, are you, if you're in an autonomous vehicle, will the car crash? So that's more, that's less of a discrimination risk and more of just a physical harm risk, kind of traditional, and then within the safety community, there's the safety of existing systems community, and then there's the safety of upcoming systems, which is the whole super intelligence and catastrophic risk portion. Yeah.
See, oh, thank you. So you mentioned before the hard fork interview with Trudeau saying the good AIs will stop the bad AIs. What is the simplest argument to counter that statement?
I mean, to me, the simplest is that it sounds a lot like the American approach to gun rights, which is the good guy with the gun will stop the bad guy with the gun, and it might work if it's just guns, but if you get to the point where like bazookas or tanks or like nuclear weapons, I mean, yeah, you might eventually get the guy with the nuclear weapon, but if he's already killed millions of people in the meantime, like. Yeah, another thing is that there's no guarantee that in the situation that the good guy will have the larger AI system first. It seems probable, again, on the assumption that you assume that OpenAI and Anthropic are good guys, which I would like to think that in their hearts they are. But I mean, ways can be stolen, mistakes can be made. You can have a megalomaniac CEO. Things can happen. So
yeah, so all right. I'm curious about your perspective coming from previously working in climate advocacy. Do you feel like the imminent risks posed by AI have fully superseded the risks of climate change for you? Or is there still part of your concern still partly on climate issues?
That's a good one. I mean, I campaigned my heart out on climate change for 5 years from 2010 to 2015. And I did definitely, I mean, it's, when you see the wildfire in Jasper, you see like, nonstop, basically at this point, it's somewhere in the world, something is happening that is dramatic. I mean, my assumption is we're looking at 2 to 10 years in AGI, which means that as even if in the worst case scenarios of climate change, it'll probably be slower than that in terms of that said, I think it really does matter what kind of world we enter into with AGI. If we're in a world that is, has severe climate instability and political, chaos and war or other things, and then you build AGI, that is a much less likely scenario to create safe use of AGI than one in which we have, solved the climate crisis and, have peace among nations, that kind of stuff. So it's not either or, and I would not, if somebody who's spent their life in climate change, don't give up on that and switch to AI. But yeah, I do think. I mean, and the other thing is, AGI AGI is both a climate issue itself because it's the expected exponential growth in data centers and power usage is going to cause climate disruption just on its own. Maybe 10% of global emissions at most, but still that's significant. But on the flip side, you can harness that AI to help find climate solutions. You can harness that AI to help develop the next technology that can capture carbon from the air, efficiently. So it is. I mean, AI is both the biggest concern and biggest hope for climate. So.
Wow, amazing. How do you think someone with some experience in AI safety can best contribute to AIGS?
If it's technical AI safety, So because we're a nonprofit, we do mostly governance work. I guess the best connection there is we can connect. We have a Slack forum, and we do share opportunities that we come across with other organizations. And certainly when for example, when the Canadian AI Safety Institute gets launched, they will be hiring. And so, connecting that kind of talent to those. And also, I mean, do consider working governments, do consider working, in the various institutes, and even in industry too. I mean, there's obviously, if you're embedded in the team that is building the advanced AI system, you'll have a much better chance at influencing it than if you're outside. Unfortunately, there's no like technical work within EAGS. Maybe that'll change if we get funding, we massively expand. But there are definitely other places, and we'd be happy to connect you to those places. Yeah.
You mentioned not making Canada a safe haven or unsafe haven for people who do not want to comply with AI safety. How should Canada interact with countries who do become havens for those who don't want to comply with AI safety laws? Would sanctions similar to the sanctions many Western countries have placed under Curacao for hosting online gambling websites be the strategy?
The thing with economic sanctions is that they tend to work on longer time scales. Basically, what they do is they dial down the economic growth of that country, which it can have a huge impact over years. I mean, look at North Korea. I mean, there again, on my assumption that we're looking at reasonable timeline on AGI, I think it's probably too slow. And Canada obviously doesn't have much military might, and even if it did, would it threaten another country? I mean, if especially that country is China, I mean, no. I think that playing the soft power, and also just, I mean, there again, I mean, those countries, they're human beings, they don't want to die either. So like just really, reinforcing that message of it, we're all in this together, regardless of our politics and our differing opinion on which form of government is right and that kind of stuff. This is a team human issue. So,
yeah. Just following up on that, can you think of any success stories in your broad knowledge of basically economic sanctions or safe havens effectively being removed, or just a broad consensus actually creating a safe global stage for a technology or any like industry?
Yeah, I mean, the go-to Canadian example is the Montreal Protocol on ozone layer depleting substances. So 1987, they passed basically a very effective international treaty ending CFCs, basically. And that was, so that worked for two reasons. One, it was very good diplomacy, and an example of what Canada can be doing. And also there were technical solutions that were relatively easy to switch over to. So you need like both the stick and the carrots. The global collaboration piece will be essential. I don't think, and I'd be very worried about like a new global government or global enforcement mechanism to enforce around the world a particular policy. I mean, it may come to that, and that may be the least worst option. But there is obviously a lot of, first of all, pulling it off is going to be extremely difficult. But on top of that, you do end up in some risk of dystopian scenarios. Yeah. So,
is it harder because it's software, not necessarily like tangible products?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's I mean, uranium, you can't just make 10,000 copies of it and ship it to another country in seconds, right? So it is a very, I mean, the closest thing we have is like chips. But even that, I mean, like the human brain runs on 40 watts. So whatever equivalent amount of chips, I'll just say like right now we're using like, tens of thousands of GPUs to do, trainings, that kind of stuff. Once the algorithms get better and the architecture gets better, you're not going to need, you could probably run an AGI on your cell phone, right? And so it's unless you start going like, take down the internet, melt all, semiconductors, which would, the impacts of that would be severe. That I don't see a way of doing it. And the other things too is there's the like the learning, like if you have thousands of people who know how to build AGI systems, then even if you get rid of the tech, as long as they have some kind of computer or something, they can rebuild it very quickly. So it is a very wicked problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. The range of promising policy interventions is often dependent on the concrete alternatives available in the broader world. One major example is technologies and business models that have been proven within the private sector. For example, AI red teaming services. What can the private sector do to contribute to improving the policy environment for AI safety and provide policymakers with a better menu of options?
I mean, uh, one of the things that we're talking about earlier about raising awareness and upskilling, just helping politicians and government understand what is it going to require technically, and probably and working in collaboration, like doing mutual embeddings where you have the tech people helping upskill the government people and the government helping explain to the tech people what's going to be needed for regulate stuff. So like sharing their knowledge with government is really important, and also just the better. There are multiple lines of defense on AGI. One of them is the labs themselves just have really good safety protocols, and that can help reduce by 80% the risk of things going wrong. And then if on top of that you have layers of smart regulation that can help reduce by another. And so the game of the safe AGI is not like a flip a switch and you're now safe. It's like airline safety. You have layer upon layer upon layer of process and technology and people and training, and if you get all that, then you get to like your 99.99 whatever percent of safety you have for airplanes. So yeah.
Yeah. You think that we can rely on the private sector to like play the role that they should be playing?
We shouldn't rely on anybody to save us. They have strong economic incentive to ship product because they need to pay their salaries and they need to make money. So the government needs to help with counterbalancing that, hopefully in a not too negative way that shuts them down, but in a way that's incentivizes them to do the right thing. I guess we'll leave them. Yeah.
So you mentioned government for a moment. Like, government will, of course, in the future, like use AI like the rest of us. How transparent is the Canadian government on its use of AI today? And you think the government should be investing in more transparent models?
It's a good question. So there was a report that came out, I think, that said there's 300 uses of AI right now in governments. And that's everything from like facial recognition at border crossings to immigration filtering to just a lot of background processes. I would definitely be in favor of higher transparency. It is hard, obviously, because models are notoriously difficult to understand, even when you can see right through them. There again, going back to the upscaling government, making sure they understand that when they're using these systems, what the impacts are, because Claude and GPT-4 can seem so smart. It's very easy to get in the habit of just taking what they say for granted and just copy pasting that. Making sure that whoever's using it is doing all of the thinking and just using the system as a help, not as a replacement of the thinking. That's big. Yeah.
Okay. And for the 2025 election, how much would the state of Canadian AI governance change if the Conservatives won at the federal level?
It's a good question. The thing is with AI is that it is a cross-partisan issue in the sense that everyone has their pet issue they care about, whether it be national security or privacy for the Conservatives, or whether it be equity and fairness for the Progressives. So that there is a way in which this is in everyone's interest to deal with it. And typically on national security side of things, there is more teamwork on that. I haven't seen anything specifically from Poilievre on this. He does have the current shadow minister of industry, Rick Perkins, who's actually one of the MPs on the Indu committee that he's comes across as a reasonable, intelligent human being, and he's probably in charge of the file. I'm open-minded, basically. I haven't seen anything, and none of the parties, I went to a number of the political conferences in the last couple of years, and just total, lack of awareness on anything to do with AGI, some beginnings of understanding of concern around misinformation and that kind of stuff for AI, but there's so much work to do just to get the membership of the parties understand, the issue, to get the policy, proposals within the parties to do that, so the MPs understand the issue. If you have a technical understanding of AGI, and you have any friends who are in politics, go and talk to them and just help them understand, because they will know things about how to harness politics to deal with the issue that you won't necessarily will, but they need to be, they need that communication. So, yeah.
Thank you. To be an effective policy advocate, how important is it to operate within the Overton window? Similarly, if C-27 doesn't pass in time for the 2025 election, will you perceive that as a lapse in AIGS's priorities?
The Overton window is really important because obviously politics is more vibes based than science based, as we saw with climate change and others. But I would say, right now, yes, there are some really hardcore no AGI can't possibly thing, people, but I think for the most part they're just don't understand it, and they're kind of curious, but it still seems like, there's a consultation on Tuesday with the Treasury Board Secretariat about building Canada's AI strategy for the public service, so how to harness AI for government. So I brought up AGI, in good fashion, and the response was, well, that's kind of blue sky, speculative. We don't want to talk about that yet, but if you accept them where they're at, and then just work with them and still keep talking and just explain, well, you may want to consider it because of this, and just like don't take offense if somebody dismisses you out of hand because you talk about AGI. Like they're there's that whole thing, like the first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. We're halfway in between that right on AI, where they can no longer ignore it because like all the frontier labs are saying we're building AGI, and many of the scientists in Canada are saying we're building AGI, and many Joshua Benjo are saying AGI could kill us. So they can no longer ignore it. Some of them are still laughing at it, some of them are fighting it, but and everyone is in a slightly different position too. Within government right now, there are some people who really get AI safety in Canada. I don't think they're in the majority yet, but they're compared to last year as night and day. So it is just be patient with people as they go through that wave of awareness. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're going to have time for 2 more questions. Again, if your question is not get answered, there are office hours right after. Mm-hmm. How quickly can Canadian visas be granted to foreigners who might want to work on AI safety or governance? It seems Canada might have a chance to capture global talent here.
Yeah, so that there, it was more generous and open a couple of years ago. There's been a bit of pushback in Canada around because they were very, very pushing very hard on immigration. But I think that if you have if you're skilled talent, and especially technical talent, I believe it's still much easier to get into Canada and to work here than it is U.S. and other countries. So definitely, I don't know enough to be able to advise specifically, but I'd say there is I know have people who have made it into Canada through their technical expertise, and I would don't shy away if that's something you're interested in. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, this will be our last one. What is your opinion on provincial versus federal legislation and its capacity to effectively moderate AI development and use? For example, the Intimate Images Protection Act in British Columbia.
This is a great question, and it speaks to the beauty and frustration of Canada, which is we are a confederation of provinces, So provinces have a different, according to the Constitution, they have a different mandate than federal. And so, for example, on open source, because it's not a inter-trade issue, it's not a commercial issue. That falls under provincial jurisdiction. So the AI and Data Act federally can't cover open source officially or can't do it other than through the criminal code. Anyways, I'll say provinces need to be on board as well, and they have their own niche area mandates. I would see so they've already been fairly big on privacy. They have a major role to play when it comes to the jobs transition and education transition and healthcare. I mean, those two, all through 3 of those areas are road to see tsunami of change, and every province will need to be working on this as well. And they're even less aware and even more under-equipped to deal with AI than the federal government.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Wyatt.
Well, thank you. Yeah.